Thank you, Dr. Praveen. I bring greeting from the Army of R&R. I would like to thank Dr. Deepak Govil for giving me this opportunity to be here and to give me such an important topic about a critically pregnant patient. Pregnancy is not a disease. It's a normal physiology of the human body, and which is a must, of course, for the continuation of the human race. But it's a state of altered physiology. Physiology is altered in the pregnancy to meet the need of growing fetus. But at times, pregnancy can become life-threatening. All this altered physiology may lead to profound change in pathology of pregnancy, and a pregnant woman may require critical care support. Whenever you deal with a pregnant patient, you must remember you are dealing with two life, a growing fetus and the mother. But the best part about a critically pregnant patient is if you provide them right care at the right time, in the right way, they recover very fast. They are young, healthy patients or ladies without any other comorbidities. So they recover very fast with the right amount of care. Critical illness can occur in pregnancy either during pregnancy, that's called antepartum, before the end of pregnancy, or during delivery, which may be normal vaginal delivery or cesarean delivery called peripartum, or it may happen after delivery also called postpartum. Generally, the antepartum part is dealt by the obstetrician. Obstetrician has developed good number of well-designed protocols to take care of the most of the illness during pregnancy. However, sometimes it goes beyond them and they require the help of intensivist, maybe anesthesiologist, perinatologist, and all other kind of specialists. Critical illness has been found to be much more common during the period of delivery, maybe normal vaginal delivery or operative delivery, the cesarean section. The morbidity and mortality has been found to be almost 10 times more during operative intervention, during cesarean intervention. Sometimes the parturition may present for the emergency cesarean or sometimes maybe elective cesarean. Whenever it's an emergency cesarean section, emergency termination of pregnancy, and the complications are likely to be much more because they are not prepared. Some of the problems we miss in these patients and the complications are much more. Many times, obstetricians debate for how long to continue the pregnancy to achieve basically the fetal maturity, that up to 37 weeks. They may like to continue the pregnancy and give many kind of drug therapy, especially beta-2 agonists like a tocolistic therapy to continue pregnancy to achieve the fetal lung maturity. And even this kind of therapy may cause critical illness such as pulmonary edema, and pregnant patient may end up in ICU. The commonest disorder of pregnancy is hypertensive disorders called preeclampsia and eclampsia. Other common disorders are hemorrhage, that's the obstetric hemorrhage. So I will be mainly dealing about these two common issues, hypertensive disorders and hemorrhage, which are most common, and about 7 to 80% problem of a pregnant lady are associated with these two problems. Other not so common problems like pericardial cardiomyopathy, liver disorder, especially acute fatty liver pregnancy, sometimes cardiac arrest may happen, thromboembolism and hemorrhagic fluid embolism. Hypertensive disorders. Preeclampsia is supposed to be a multi-system disorder. It can lead to the MODS or multi-organ failure. Fairly common, affect about 5 to 7% of pregnant women. It can affect the fetus and mother both equally. When it affects the fetus, called fetal syndrome, and when it affects the mother, called maternal syndrome, or it can affect the both, called feto-maternal syndrome. In fetus, it can cause fetal loss, it can gynecia, or preterm birth. This hyperpreeclampsia accounts for about 50 to 80% of ICU admission during pregnancy and during puerperium. The sine qua non of preeclampsia is hypertension, proteinuria after 20 weeks of gestation. There are other kind of hypertensive disorder in pregnancy which may happen, like gestation hypertension, chronic hypertension with the preeclampsia and preeclampsia, with the combination of preeclampsia. Preeclampsia can become severe preeclampsia normally when the BP becomes more than 140/90 and the proteinuria, proteins more than 300 milligram in 24 hours. We call it definitely preeclampsia. Preeclampsia can become severe preeclampsia when the BP is high, become more than 160/110. There is a falling platelet count, thrombocytopenia. Thrombocytopenia is fairly common in pregnancy, called gestational thrombocytopenia. But when it falls rapidly, it could be disorder sensitive of preeclampsia. There may be impaired liver function, there may be right quadrant pain, there may be cerebral edema, there may be pulmonary edema, there may be oliguria. All these features are sensitive of severe preeclampsia, and generally it needs termination of pregnancy. Eclampsia, whenever there is a seizure during preeclampsia, we call it preeclampsia. Other various life-threatening complications can occur in this patient, maybe seizure, that is eclampsia, cerebral hemorrhage, thrombotic problems in the brain, pulmonary edema, DIC, acute renal failure and acute hepatic failure. So what is the cause of preeclampsia? Why did it happen? Exact cause is not known. You must remember the exact cause of preeclampsia is not known. There are various kind of theories, immunologic theories, coagulation-based theories, some issue with the paternal antibodies. But the basic pathophysiology, what happens in a patient of preeclampsia, there is abnormal vascular response to the placenta. Somehow abnormal placentation lead to abnormal vascular response, or there is dynamic vasospasm in the various vascular beds of the body, in the kidney, into the brain, which may lead to the seizures. There is endothelial dysfunction, activation of coagulation system, enhanced platelet aggregation, which also lead to thrombocytopenia, and increased systemic vascular resistance, which also causes hypertension. In a nutshell, there is genetic predisposition, they say there may be immunologic rejection, which both combined may lead to the failure of placentation. This causes uteroplacental ischemia and leads to release of various inflammatory mediators. The decreased placental prostacyclin, which causes intravascular coagulation, endothelial damage in all the vascular parts of the body, increased capillary permeability leads to edema. On the other side, decreased active renin, decreased aldosterone, sodium loss and decreased plasma volume, and increased sensitive angiotensin to vasoconstriction, hypertension, and all this combined cause organ dysfunction. All these pathophysiological changes what I discussed basically just now, how does it manifest in a maternal mother? Basically it will serious effect like hypertension, decreased plasma volume. All these changes affect the kidneys, cause proteinuria, lungs, may cause pulmonary edema, and brain, cerebral vasospasm may lead to seizures. There is also increased possibility of DIC, HELLP syndrome, hepatic rupture, infarction of hemorrhage in these patients. The definite treatment of preeclampsia termination of pregnancy. As we say, the cause of preeclampsia is not known. Basically, pregnancy or placenta is the cause of preeclampsia. In the same way, the only definite treatment is termination of pregnancy. As early we terminate the pregnancy, it is safer for the mother. But as I said, sometimes we have to debate to continue the pregnancy to attain the fetal lung maturity by various methods, by tocolysis. Sometimes we have to terminate the pregnancy, we may need to give steroid to achieve the fetal lung maturity. But the definite treatment of preeclampsia is termination of pregnancy. So as I said, the initial manifestation hypertension and proteinuria. But the hypertension requires active management. The moment blood pressure goes beyond 140/90, the obstetricians start treating the patient for hypertension. They put on various kind of antihypertensive. They used to earlier use methyl dopa, hydrolazine, Sometimes they use nifedipine also outside, though it's not recommended nowadays. Nifedipine, oral sublingual nifedipine, not recommended, but in young healthy patients without any cardiac problem, it still can be used, nothing available. The prevention of treatment of hypertension and prevention of seizures. While deliberate on these two main problems a little more, BP should be kept below 160/100. Initially they start with oral labetalol, 200 mg, 8 hours they start. Sometimes you have to give IV labetalol. As an intensivist, patient ends up in ICU with severe hypertension, with the hypertensive encephalopathy, maybe cerebral hemorrhage, cerebral infarction. The BP has to be brought down early. Labetalol intravenous available, can be given 10 to 20 mg IV bolus. You can repeat in 10 minutes or give a continuous infusion of 2 mg per minute, about 100 to 120 mg per hour. Infusion of labetalol can be given. Normally BP normalizes within few hours after delivery, but it may continue for up to 2 to 4 weeks postpartum. That is post-delivery, also may require active management and intervention. Seizures, another problem. Nowadays we don't see so many patients coming with seizures because of Maxelf, EG availability, very cheap drug available everywhere, and very early use of Maxelf by the obstetrician. So we do not see patient nowadays with the seizures. The risk of seizures is about 1 in 200 with untreated preeclampsia, and the widespread use of Maxelf has reduced the incidence to about 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 20,000 delivery. What is the type of seizures? They develop grand mal variety of seizures with clonic muscular activity. Seizures can occur before delivery, during delivery, or even after delivery. Many times, patients are brought to the operation theatre for cesarean, and they start seizuring there. I have seen patients seizuring on the operating table just before induction of anesthesia. They throw seizures on the table and become very difficult to manage. Even postpartum, post-operative, they are being cared in the postnatal ward or obstetric ward, they can throw a seizure. To do the EEG of this patient, EEG may show some epileptiform abnormalities. CT MRI may be normal many times. It may show diffuse edema to focal areas of hemorrhage and infarctions. Sometimes there is something called RPLS, that is reversible post-leukoencephalus syndrome, commonly seen in the posterior white matter of the cerebral hemisphere in the parieto-occipital region. This is commonly seen because of posterior circulations when there is hypertension. Sort of hypertensive encephalopathy, posterior circulation is more prone for the hypertensive injuries and they result in, but it's a reversible condition. The moment you provide supportive care, bring down the blood pressure, the reversible post-leukoencephalus syndrome reverse in these patients. Even when delivery is impending, a pre-eclamptic woman should receive an anticonvulsant to prevent eclamptic seizure. I said the Maxelf is easily available, very cheap, which can be given, but we need to monitor whenever patient receive Maxelf therapy. So magnesium sulfate, the drug of choice nowadays. Earlier we used to use phenytoin, even diazepam, midazolam drugs are used, but now it is proven magnesium sulfate is the drug of choice to be given all the preeclamptic patients for the prevention of seizures and for the treatment of seizures. You can give IV bolus of 4 to 6 gram, followed by continuous infusion of 1 to 4 gram per hour. Obstetrician has used various kind of regime. You must have heard some regime like Pritchard regime. They give 4 mg initial bolus, then on to each buttock 4 gram, and followed by 4 gram every 6 hours. So there is various kind of regime. But as an intensivist, one can use intravenous Maxelf. As I told, this 4 to 6 gram followed by the infusion. But Maxelf can lead to various kind of problem like respiratory depression, especially patient of oliguria. You need to watch out the side effect of Maxelf. If facility available, one can monitor the plasma levels, which should maintain between 4 to 7 millimole per liter. Monitor for the clinical signs of toxicity, especially respiratory depression. Monitor for the patellar reflexes. How does it act? Basically, it causes sort of cerebral vasodilation and relieves the cerebral vasospasm and prevents the seizures. Though it has got some antihypertensive effect also, but it's not an antihypertensive mainly, does not reduce the blood pressure to some main degree. Primarily as a cerebral vasodilator, and prevent the occurrence and recurrence of seizures. These patients may require preeclampsia patients with ICU admission, especially for hypertension and encephalopathy, and the BP becomes more than 200 by 120. They may develop pulmonary edema, again because of various reasons. Pulmonary edema, damage to endothelial capillaries, low oncotic pressure because of low plasma albumin, very high risk of developing pulmonary edema in these patients. Oliguria, which is referred to repeated fluid challenges. Oliguria can develop eclamptic seizures, DIC, renal failure. All these patients require ICU admission. Hypertension and CVA may develop pulmonary edema. Why do they develop pulmonary edema so fast? Because of endothelial damage and low oncotic pressure, excessive IV fluid. It is very common during cesarean section when they come for operative delivery and say anesthesia is given spinal anesthesia. The preloading, co-loading is very common. To prevent spinal induced hypotension, the large amount of fluid may be given at time to the parturient, and the moment the fetus is delivered and you give uterotonic drugs like oxytocin or methergine, uterus contact, the blood will come back to central circulation and patient may end up with pulmonary edema. So excessive fluid is very common. Sometimes there may be transient systolic and diastolic dysfunction of the heart because of coronary artery vasospasm or general vasospasm in the circulation. That is also seen sometimes. But the common cause is endothelial damage, low oncotic pressure and excessive IV fluid, which can result in pulmonary edema. So whenever you have to give a fluid to this patient, especially for oliguria, the common balance you have to titrate when the patient presents with oliguria. You want to improve the urinary output by giving additional bolus of the fluid. You must give the additional bolus of fluid so that the adequate urine output. But every time check the lungs for auscultation. Make sure there is no crepitations or crackles in the lungs. Otherwise, while we are trying to improve the urinary output by giving additional fluid, you may end up with pulmonary edema. And treating pulmonary edema is much more difficult. Patient may require intubation, ventilation. On the other hand, treating oliguria is easier. The patient may require support therapy. Always take care about the prevention of pulmonary edema in these patients. They are also prone for hemorrhagic complication. DIC, I will talk a little more in detail. Low platelet count. Liver transaminases. Liver transaminase like AST and LPG in this patient. HELP syndrome, that hemolysis, elevated liver enzymes and low platelet count, fairly common and may occur in about 20% cases of severe preeclampsia. Acute renal failure can occur in patient of preeclampsia. This again because of due to intravascular volume depletion. The plasma volume in the preeclampsia is contracted. There is renal vasospasm, and there is something called more peculiar to the which happen in a patient of preeclampsia. The renal pathology called glomerular endotheliosis. There is damage of glomerular capillary, thrombus formation. The fenestra of glomerular endothelium is damaged, which leads to proteinuria. That's a proteinuria happen because of glomerular endotheliosis. Usually, renal injury is mild, resolves commonly. ARF sometimes due to ATN or cortical necrosis may also occur, but not so common. So whenever there is sustained oliguria, which may happen during just after cesarean or after delivery, one must watch out for the pulmonary edema. Avoid diuretics in this patient unnecessarily. It's a common reaction. I've seen many times. You find urine is not coming adequately, give a diuretic. The furosemide or some other bolus is given very commonly. So the oliguria may be because of hypovolemia. In a patient of hypovolemia, if you get diuretic, especially furosemide, you may further aggravate the renal damage. So ensure the adequate intravascular volume before giving an diuretic. So do not give unnecessary diuretic in this patient before ensuring adequate intravascular volume. Such sustained oliguria may be there because of hemolytic uremic syndrome, a different kind of pathology, and thrombotic thrombocytopenic purpura, HUS and TTP, at times difficult to differentiate from HELP syndrome. So there is a lot of overlap in the various kind of pathology, HELP syndrome, HUS and TTP. Cesarean delivery, this patient as such may present for cesarean, which may be done under general anesthesia, spinal anesthesia. Whenever they come for general anesthesia, some of you may be dealing with in the operation theatre or maybe giving anesthesia. They're looking after this patient in the ICU. They will get a difficult intubation because possibility of laryngeal edema, intubation difficult, and they may end up with a section called cannot ventilate, cannot intubate. Fairly common in a preeclampsia patient. Postpartum atony, uterus can bleed like a tap sometime, and sudden severe accidental hemorrhage can occur because of postpartum atony. Hypertensive crisis can occur when you give methylalbumine, ergonovine following delivery, and even with spinal anesthesia, we need to watch out for the platelet count. Platelet count can fall very rapidly in this patient. As such, there may be thrombocytopenia, platelet count may be hovering around 70,000 to 1 lakh. But the platelet count falling rapidly indicates preeclampsia, and patient is approaching towards the HELLP syndrome. And one need a latest platelet count on the morning of surgery to decide whether you need to give any epidural or spinal anesthesia for these patients. Hemorrhagic complication, what is coagulopathy? Fairly common. Second most common problem issue in pregnant patient. Peripartum hemorrhage. It's a significant cause of maternal and fetal morbidity. One of the top 3 causes of maternal death. Antepartum hemorrhage can occur because placental abrasion. Placenta can separate from the uterine wall because of various underlying problems and can cause painless bleeding. Uterine rupture. Nowadays, more and more cesareans are being done. Almost 25 to 30% parturients land up with operative delivery, cesarean delivery. More number of cesarean means there is more problem in the subsequent delivery. They may end up with more placental abruption, placental uterine rupture, placenta previa, placenta accreta, increta, percreta. Placenta previa, again, placenta accreta, increta, percreta are the nightmare for any obstetrician. They all are very scared to touch a patient of placenta accreta, increta, percreta. Most of them need operative delivery. Placenta accreta means placenta is adherent to the endometrial wall. The rest of the layer separating the placenta with the endometrial wall is not very clear. So placenta adherent. The placenta adherent separating placenta cause torrential bleeding. Accreta means placenta veli has invaded the myometrium of the uterus. And percreta means it has gone beyond the myometrium into the various pelvic organs. So this patient requires a lot of planning before cesarean. But the problem with this placenta accreta and various other difficult to diagnose antenatally. Many times obstetrician are failed to diagnose, or patient may come first time for operative delivery, operative intervention. Obstetrician may not be available. Ultrasound, not very specific, though sometimes they can diagnose, but not very specific. MRI may not be available. MRI is ideal in this patient, but MRI may not be available. So while operating intervention being done, they are not aware. They are dealing with a patient of placenta accreta, percreta, and they end up with severe hemorrhage. I have seen patients on the table, they dying because of extensive hemorrhage and bleeding. Uterine atony, postpartum hemorrhage. Recently, in the recent past, one young lady on the operation theatre table developed severe uterine atony and lost about 2.5 liters of blood. I was asking the senior obstetrician, what is the thought? You can't make out which patient will develop uterine atony. They said there is no way to make out which patient will. There are risk factors, of course, but definitely nobody can say which patient will end up with uterine atony and end up with a postpartum hemorrhage. So they require very aggressive management. Prompt resuscitation has to be started. Start to IV lines, start oxygenation, start ventilation, ensure oxygenation. They may be under spinal anesthesia. You have to convert from spinal anesthesia to general anesthesia. Put arterial line, put central line for invasive hemodynamic monitoring and for the assessment of intravascular volume. Correct hypovolemia by giving fluids, Crestovite and bloods. There may be impaired coagulation because of bleeding, may be because of impaired coagulation. Do the DIC screening test like PT, APPT, peprinogen level, T-dimers level, FDP, and nowadays you got the point of care coagulation testing like TAG and ROTEM. They are also very useful, and if available, one can use this thromboelastography and rotational thromboelastography. Surgical control of the bleeding. The manual exploration of uterine cavity to deliver placenta. It is to be done in case of placenta accreta or placenta increta. They have to manually remove the placenta from which is adherent to the uterine wall. They need to do bimanual compression of the uterus. One hand they put inside the uterine cavity, and from the other hand they have to bimanually compress the uterus to stop the bleeding. The B-links of suture, they tight sutures over the uterus, the fundus of the uterus, sort of lynching of the uterus to stop the bleeding. Bilateral ligation of uterine artery, internal iliac artery, it's to be done. Hydrostatic balloon also be put inside the uterus, or sometime in the radiologic suit, the interventional ambulation of the vessels supplying the uterus to control the bleeding may be required. To control the hemorrhage, one can give a uterotonics. About oxytonics, 10 to 20 units in a liter of saline can be given slowly and given rapidly the oxytocin can cause hypotension, tachycardia, nausea, vomiting, headache, all kind of problem. So one need to give oxytocin slowly. Methyl ergometin 0.2 milligram. Other drugs available like prostaglandin, PG2 alpha, carbocross 0.25 milligram can be given intramyometal or intramuscular. Generally we give PGE1. They can be given orally, sublingually, vaginally, rectally. All the routes they generally patient kept in the ICU, and they may give sublingually, vaginally, or rectally various kind of uterotonics. What is the difficulty with hemorrhage control? You have seen patient is bleeding. The problem is inaccurate estimation of blood loss. Sometimes it's difficult to make out the patient losing from one side, and you're trying to replace the blood loss, but you don't know how much patient blood loss has lost. Even the lab university report may not be rapidly available to you. So use the clinical judgment. Keep on looking at the site of the operation, how much blood is being lost, and then replace accordingly. There may be some unoccurring hemorrhage risk factors, as I said. There may be placenta accreta, uterine atony, and retained placenta, which can lead to severe hemorrhage. Delayed intervention, sometimes. Or there may be inappropriate or inadequate transfusion of blood and blood products. If we do not give correct amount of blood and blood products, the hemorrhage may continue for a long time. Patient may end up in DIC, patient may become hypothermic, may become coagulopathy, and may become acidotic. What is classically called the triad of death, acidosis, hypothermia, and coagulopathy. It's fairly common if they lose large amount of blood and we have to replace large amount of blood by the cold IV fluids. Massive hemorrhage protocol must be set up. Whenever we deal with a patient of placenta accreta, increta, petricata, placenta previa, we must have this multidisciplinary meeting, involve the radiologist, interventional radiologist, anesthesiologist, intensivist, obstetrician, all should meet in case of massive hemorrhage, how we should going to manage massive hemorrhage. Repeat lab testing like DIC screen, as I said, or point of care testing using TEG or ROTEM. Use fluid warmers and forced air warmers to avoid hypothermia. Use lower extremity compression device to prevent thromboembolism. That is also risk in this patient. Ready for ACLS. Keep your drugs, defibrillator ready in case a partial developed cardiac arrest. One should be able to revive rapidly. Designate a protocol person for blood collection record keeping. You are getting blood, transfusing. We don't know how much blood has been lost, how much blood and blood products have been given. So one need to keep accurate record in counting. You can give cryoprecipitate also. The fibrin is much less than 100 milligram. And factor 10, recombinant factor 10 can be given, especially after 10 units of PRBC and for replacement after FFP and cryo. So factor 10 also they use in some cases of obstetric hemorrhage. So this is about two common problems of hypertensive disorders and hemorrhagic problem. Others some common, not so common, acute fatty liver pregnancy. It's rare but fatal disease in third trimester pregnancy. Clinical features may be malaise, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain and jaundice. There may be hypertension, rare transaminases, coagulopathies, thrombocytopenia and hypoglycemia. One must have to have high risk of index of suspicion in this patient. Imaging is not very useful and limited usefulness. Generally in this condition also, treatment is supportive care. Pericardic cardiomyopathy. Again, rare but may lead to high mortality. What happens is, like any other cardiomyopathy, the development of left ventricular biventricular failure in the last month of pregnancy generally, or within 5 months of delivery. Usually diagnose exclusion. If you don't find any other cause for the cardiomyopathy, then it's a diagnosis of exclusion in a pregnant woman. Possible cause for this is myocarditis, maybe some viral myocarditis. Abnormal immune response to pregnancy, stress activity cytokines which may cause cardiomyopathy, and prolonged tocolysis. Prolonged tocolysis, as I said again, obstetrician may try to delay the onset of labor to achieve the fetal lung maturity. So they use beta-2 agonist, and the beta-2 agonist may cause peripard, pulmonary edema and cardiomyopathy. Generally good recovery of LV function, better prognosis this condition has got. Generally within recover completely or partially within 6 months. They do not recover within 6 months, then you think of some other cause. There is fourth chamber enlargement in echocardiography is normal coronary, and with clinical features of ventricular failure, dysarrhythmia and or pulmonary emboli. Treatment is normally like for any other cardiac failure, bed rest, salt restriction, diuresis, reduction of period afterload, but do not use ACE inhibitors in a pregnant patient. the ACE inhibitors or beta blocker are not the drug of choice in a pregnant patient, but this may cause fetal compromise. So once patient delivered, then you can use any antihypertensive or any kind of drug. Whenever we give any drug to the pregnant woman, we have to keep in mind how this drug affects the fetus. Cardiac arrest, the dreaded complication which nobody wants to see. As I said, cardiac arrest may lead to fetal mortality, and fetal maternal mortality. Then this becomes a very big issue in any hospital. The question will be asked in the parliament, and this reflects very poor indicator of our overall health status of the country. It may add to the maternal mortality, which reflects very poorly on the health status of the country. Cause of cardiac arrest, amniotic fluid embolism. Again, a rare but dreaded complication. Commonly seen during the operative intervention, during cesarean delivery, and cesarean has gone perfectly fine. But after surgery, suddenly patient collapses. There is hypotension, there is tachycardia, the breathing difficulty, indicative of amniotic fluid embolism. But very difficult to diagnose. It's only a corroborative evidence. Complication of eclampsia. I talked so many complications of eclampsia. Magnesium overdose. Sometimes I said magnesium is freely available and easily given by most of the people, but sometimes overdose, and especially if patient not passing adequate amount of urine in the setup of oliguria, one must watch out for the magnesium overdose, otherwise patient may end up with respiratory arrest and followed by cardiac arrest. Trauma, various other kind of cardiac conditions, something like rheumatoid heart disease, over that pregnancy, valvular heart disease can become unanticipated difficult intubation, especially common in pre-eclamptic women. During general anesthesia, you try to intubate, not able to intubate because of laryngeal edema, difficult intubation, cannot ventilate, cannot intubate, may end up with cardiac arrest. And very low reserve, because reduced FRC, very low reserve for hypoxemia, they will become hypoxic very fast. Aspiration, patient is not fasting, full stomach, all the pregnant patients are taken as a full stomach, whether they are fasting or not. And during general anesthesia, there is always possibility of aspiration of the gastric content into the trachea and respiratory system, which can lead to aspiration and cardiac arrest. Cardiac arrest, by and large, it is same like standard ACLS protocol, but keeping in the physiological change of pregnancy, the gravid uterus may compress over the IVC and over the aorta and may prevent the venous return to the heart. So what we do in pregnancy, slight tilt, left tilt during CPR after 24 weeks of pregnancy. Whenever you give chest compression, slight tilt after 24 weeks. During defibrillation, when you put a standard position paddle for defibrillation, displace the left breast. Generally breasts are engorged, large. So putting paddle over the precordium may be difficult. One is to displace the left breast before putting a paddle for the defibrillation. If any fetal monitoring being done, fetal tochocardiography being done, remove fetal monitoring devices which may cause arching of the fetus monitoring. As I said, follow the normal ACLS protocol. Sometimes treat the underlying cause. You know the underlying cause may be blood loss, hemorrhage, whatever, treat the underlying cause. And many times we need to do the cesarean, very important cesarean, especially after 24 weeks. 24 hours fetal viability has been achieved. And if there is no response within 4 minutes of aggressive sedation, then one can do for the perimortem cesarean, at least to save the life of the fetus. Anesthesia, some of you may be dealing with anesthesia. You can decide whatever you want. Generally, preeclampsia is not a conduct case for regional anesthesia. Regional anesthesia is well tolerated in this patient. But avoid regional anesthesia in this patient sometimes because of when there is renal dysfunction, there is oliguria, there may be already hypovolemia. Hypovolemia, you may try to push more IV fluids, giving crystalloid to prevent the hypotension. And if you give more fluid, they may end up with a pulmonary edema. They may have coagulopathy like HELLP syndrome. Platelet count may be low. So if platelet count less than 75,000, do not give spinal anesthesia. They may altered sensorium, altered consciousness because of encephalopathy, hepatic this hypertension and coagulopathy. They may have pulmonary edema. They may have hypotension. So in all these conditions, avoid spinal anesthesia. Thank you. I have finished all this. Thank you very much.